6.
Hi, and welcome to today's Fire Engineering Google Hangout, brought to you by our good friends at Key Fire Hose. Key Fire Hose is an amazing company. We'd like to thank them for the sponsorship of this particular Hangout. This is part 2, and this is going to become a regularly occurring in January. This will be every third Wednesday of the month. We're going to be doing a Fireground Hangout with Bill Gustin and Mike Dugan, and Bill will be bringing in his Hoseline crew and his engine company operations gang that we have with us today every third Wednesday of the month going forward into the future. So for as long as Bill holds out. So and Bill and Mike. So we're banking on a bunch of 60-year-olds here to carry this. So I don't know how long we're going to last. But hey, our friends at Key Fire Hose, we just want to say a few words about them. Please go visit their site, keyfire.com. Keyfire.com. Key Fire Hose, the fire hose company. They're down in Dothan, Alabama, an incredible facility down there, gigantic facility. This is American-made hose, made by people that really care about firefighters. They're just like us. They put the mission first, they put their employees and firefighters second, and they put themselves last. They make quality products. You know, there's a lot of fire hose out there that you can buy that comes from places where they have people that really don't like us or our way of life. And if you call people comrade and you like to hang out at Occupy Wall Street, buy their hose. But if you're hanging out in an American fire department, buy Key Fire Hose. It's better hose. So anyway, little politics there. I thought you'd enjoy that, kind of like Tim the Tool Man. So anyway, without any further ado, I'll bring the real comedian on board, and we'll go around. We'll introduce our panel today. We've got the Bill Gustin, who's going to be leading our discussion today on engine company operations and everything to do with engine company ops. So, Bill, why don't you say hi, and then we'll go around the room, introduce everybody, and we'll get right to the questions.
Hello, Bill Gustin here, captain with Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department for the last 36 years. Before that, I was a firefighter in the Chicago area. Began my career with the Wheaton, Illinois Fire Department, suburb of Chicago. And then I was a career firefighter in Naperville. I'm a company officer, 60 years old, still on the job. Thank God I've got some young guys that carry me pretty well, take care of the old man. And I'm glad to be part of this discussion again. I've tried to pick a diverse group from around the country. And Bobby, if it's okay with you, we'll start on the West Coast. I'll make some introductions. Daryl Liggins, I'm wearing the Modesto Fire Symposium shirt, which I got when I first met you. I met Daryl. He is an fire officer with the Oakland, California Fire Department, a real engine company guy. It wasn't 5 minutes before I figured out that this guy was a brother from a different mother, and a real engine company guy. He really takes it to heart. So Daryl is he's our representative from the West Coast. So Daryl, if you want to say a few words.
Yeah, well, thanks for that introduction. It was a pleasure working with you a couple years ago there in Modesto. They have some great guys out there. So I started the fire department in 1993. I worked in another department before Oakland. I was in Redwood City, which is a smaller department, 5 engines and a truck there. We had 4 people on an engine and 5 people on a truck in its heyday, but that staffing went down like a lot of other places in the country. I spent 7 years there. I was an engineer and a paramedic, and I came to Oakland in '99. I've been a lieutenant since 2006, and so it's we've seen a lot of changes in both of those organizations, and luckily I was able to play a part in making some of the changes on the engine operations in both Redwood City and Oakland. And you know, it's been great. It's been positive. You don't always make friends making some radical changes, but it's made our fire ground more efficient and safer. We're never going to be safe, but it's going to be safer, and it's going to be more effective and efficient. So anyway, great to hang out with you guys.
Well, Clark Lamping is a captain from Clark County, Nevada. That's the Las Vegas area. Clark has responsibility as a captain in one of the busiest fire stations in the world, right on the Las Vegas Strip. And as you know, the Las Vegas Strip is an adult Disneyland. I don't know how else you can describe it. Population density is absolutely incredible. the potential is incredible with all the casinos and hotels. Very busy company. He has a highly motivated bunch of fellas. I know, Bobby, you've been in his station 11 right there on the strip.
Absolutely.
Can't say enough about Clark County Fire Department. I was honored to give instructed there for 2 days just about a week ago, and was well received. Clark has an enormous responsibility with the density and all the activity on the Las Vegas Strip. So, Clark, again, thank you for being such a fine host, and I got to say this again, you are a brother in the true way, because you are watching out after my little girl who doesn't have any family contacts in Las Vegas, and my daughter's a speech pathologist in Henderson, and Clark and his wife and family have embraced my daughter and watch out after her. And Clark, from the bottom of my heart, for my whole family, we thank you so much, Clark.
My pleasure, Captain Gustin. He already gave the introduction for me. I don't know what else to say. I've been on the job 17 years, captain at Fire Station 11. Like Captain Gustin said, I've got some pretty big buildings in my first inn. The biggest is the MGM Hotel. I don't know if anyone's ever seen it or anyone's ever stayed there. The MGM Hotel has 18,000 doors. It has 50 elevators, and it's 10 million square feet. So that's just one of the 5 properties that Station 11 protects on Las Vegas Boulevard. So that's kind of what we're up against in my first inn. So I've got real specific operational guidelines that we have to use for that kind of building. And so I'm just happy to be back. Happy Chief Halton invited us all back, and I'd love to learn and keep learning. Thank you, gentlemen.
Well, from America's Heartland, I see that Jason is muted. Jason Hoevelmann. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yep, I'm unmuted now.
Oh, okay. From America's Heartland, suburbs of St. Louis, Missouri, is our brother Jason Hoevelmann. Does a lot of writing. I guess we can mention it now for Fire Rescue Magazine, because that's under your umbrella, and a great authority on suburban and rural firefighting. And he wears a couple different hats that he's going to explain. He's on 2 different departments, and they're rather diverse. So, Jason, if you could.
Yeah, I started as a volunteer at the age of 13 here in Sullivan, my hometown, and I've been involved since then. That's where I'm at today, and I'm a deputy chief here, and then my career department, which is in St. Louis County, North County, and I've been there for 15 years, and I'm a captain on a quint. So we have the challenges associated with being an engine company and a truck company and having that great big ladder on top all the time, which limits us a little bit. But thanks again for having me on, and honored to be on here with such a distinguished panel. Thanks to Pinwheel and Fire Engineering, and appreciate being here.
All right, and representing the Northeast from the Washington, D.C. area, we have Dan Shaw as a battalion chief with Fairfax County, Virginia, recently promoted to battalion chief. If you ever get a chance to go to FDIC or wherever else Dan is presenting, for God's sake, go see him. I go see his class every year at FDIC and come back plagiarizing and stealing all kinds of material from Dan. He's also co-author of 25 to Survive with, you know, his name escapes me right now. It's
Doug Mitchell.
Doug Mitchell. Not to be confused with Paul Mitchell, which I did.
Brother who makes shampoo.
He's the shampoo guy. None of which that Dan has any need for. But Dan, beyond that introduction, could you just tell a little bit about yourself?
No, hey, thanks a lot, Bill, and thanks, Bobby, for having us. It's always an honor. Yeah, as Bill said, I'm a battalion chief in Fairfax, Virginia, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. And I was recently promoted, and I spent the majority of my career on an engine company. And thus why I'm very excited to get back and at least have a conversation talking engine company stuff. And I don't want to hold up that conversation, so we can jump right into it. So, Bill, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right, fellas. Bobby, do you want to begin with the first question?
Yeah, let's get right into it, and thank you all for being here today. Let's get right to a question that's universal across the country. Does your department require the first arriving engine at a working fire to secure its own water supply? Tommy Brennan always used to say, always be responsible for your own water, and that was the mantra that I grew up under, that you were always responsible for your own water at a working fire. So I can say for the departments that I worked on, yes, I was always required if I was the first due to secure a water supply if it was in fact a working fire. There was a caveat in our SOPs that said if you thought that the fire could be extinguished by tank water or if it was in the very early stages, then you were given a pass on that. But it was always strongly recommended that if you felt it was going to be a multiple line fire, in other words, a primary line and a backup line fire, you were to secure your own water supply. Bill, I'll hand it to you.
I don't think there's any argument that given the opportunity of a hydrant close by and the staff to stretch a line to or from a hydrant, it's always better to secure your own water supply because it is a crapshoot. It is a gamble when you are relying on a company that isn't there yet to lay you in a supply line or to reverse out into a hydrant. There's no guarantee that that second engine is going to show up. I just want to tell a real quick story. I was relieved by a young officer one morning on a Sunday morning. They had a report of a fire. They responded. First due. Now my company has a 500-gallon booster tank. The newly promoted company officer decided we'll pass up the hydrant, operate off the booster tank, and rely on engine 7, which is typically our second engine, to lay us in a supply line. Well, bad plan because engine 7 wasn't even on the assignment. They were on moved up to a different station on a relocation. By the time that engine 30 got there was about 10 minutes. They had burnt 2 adjoining structures and had to struggle with 5-inch hose stretching it back to the hydrant that they should have laid in from to begin with. It's always a gamble, but it's something we do all the time. If you decide that you're not going to lay a line in, you got to ask yourself, what if that second engine does not get there in time? And don't commit your people deeply inside of a structure with just a tank of water, especially a commercial building. You have to realize your limitations because at any moment you could run out of water. So we're just going to start with Daryl and his thoughts on the same subject.
Yeah, this has been a hot button topic for my fire department. I work in an environment that is a very densely populated urban environment, and our engine companies are also very closely related. So I don't face really the same challenge of if the second engine, doesn't arrive. For us, it's a big race. We get 3 or 4 engines there within a minute or 2 of each other. But the simple answer is yes, we do require the first engine. If the policy says if smoke or fire showing or indication of a working fire, the first 2 engine will bring in a water supply. There's lots of ways to bring in a water supply. We know some departments are largely forward lay, or the second engine does a reverse lay from the first engine, or they may use a static bed and lay out to the hydrant. Our department is largely a forward lay fire department. It's not my favorite way to secure a water supply, but that's the world I'm dealing with. It works. We use a 4-way valve, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. But I do find, we used the term magic bullet earlier, that there's not really an absolute that you should use all the time. The fault I sometimes find with our policy of bringing in that line is the second engine is now driving around the first engine that was required to bring in its own water supply. So I think that could be solved just by having some communication where we're coming into the block together or something to have them bring in you a line. The other thing is it's really common for us to get fires in apartments, often on like a 3rd floor apartment. And rather than having my firefighter down the street securing that water supply, I feel sometimes that I'm putting the cart before the horse, and I would rather have them assisting with that hose line stretch up the stairs and flaking out that line at the apartment, and then having a second due company bringing in the water supply. But it does require communication. I have to know the environment I'm working in, make sure that there isn't a delay from another company. I find that I can get water on the fire faster sometimes if I'm not securing a water supply. But in short, we do have that policy. It's not always adhered to, but that's why it's been a hot button topic in our department. So.
And
Clark?
Bill, before we go to Clark, just remember, if you're out there listening and you've got a question for Clark or Jason or Dan or Bill, you can send it to us at #FETalk. Just go on Twitter, #FETalk, and send us your questions, and I'll shoot them out to the panel. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay, Clark, you want to weigh in on this?
Absolutely, Cap. We in Clark County, similar to Oakland, and like Daryl was saying, we're a pretty urban department, and we've got a lot of units stacked up. We're minimum staffing of 4, so we're pretty fortunate. Our water supply is usually good. You know, the majority of Vegas is only 50 years old, so our hydrants are good, our water supply is good, and with that kind of staffing, typically what we do is we roll up first engine, goes right to the fire, and he will announce, that officer will announce if he has a water supply or if he needs the second engine to bring in a water supply. Those firefighters get all the hose out, and they get the hose laid out, 2 hoses down, primary and a backup line. And usually, if you're working in the urban environment, that the second engine is right behind the first engine, they will bring in the water supply, and those 2 engineers will make that connection. Now, that being said, as a second or third arriving officer, I'm absolutely looking at the dispatch. I'm listening to who's coming, who's arriving. I'm trying to determine what order we're going to arrive in. And also I'm looking at my map book. All our hydrants are marked on our maps. So I'm looking at the location of the hydrants. I can pretty much determine by the address the location of the hydrant on who's going to grab the hydrant and who's going to be second and third in units. So that's really important. Again, like Daryl said, we do have some stations that are in the suburbs that they might be operating for 5 or 6 minutes by themselves. They have different policies. Absolutely, you're going to be bringing in your own water supply. You're not going to wait 5 minutes for someone else to show up. So that's, in the short of it, that's how it rolls for us.
And when you have your fire code, your building code may require that if you have any kind of system, sprinkler or standpipe, a fire department connection, that there be a hydrant within, say, 100 or 150 feet of that connection. And if that's your job to pump into that fire department connection, it's a simple matter of, well, maybe not a simple matter, but a doable matter to hand stretch. The engineer can hand stretch the line back to the hydrant. Mr. Jason.
Gustin, one more thing. That's strictly, my policy for that was strictly rural, residential firefighting. Anytime we do commercial firefighting, everything slows down. The first in operating engine will be bringing in their water supply. We're not going interior with 1 crew on a commercial structure. Everything slows down. So we do different operations for commercial and residential structures.
Couldn't agree more. I think you're out of your mind to go into a smoky furniture store off your booster tank. You're out of your mind. And I would hope that practice I think, hopefully we've learned from our tragedies, fires that we're lucky enough not to go to realize that is a huge blunder, and it is not worth the risk. Not in a commercial occupancy that has minimal risk to civilians. Jason Hoevelmann from the St. Louis area, would you like to weigh in on that? I know you're in a more suburban and rural setting than the rest of us.
Right. The rural setting in the volunteer department, they typically are going to try and hit their own water supply if they can. Obviously, out in the rural area, their water supply is their booster tank until they get tankers going. But in the suburban area, our SOG currently requires a second due company to establish the water supply. However, we are allowed, and we do it frequently, and we have the ability to secure our own water supply if we do have more fire than what we think a booster tank can handle. And we've done that before, and we have the latitude to either forward lay in or reverse lay out and leave room for the next arriving company in front of the building. But as a rule, you've seen our area is fairly old and small, but we got really good water. And the challenge for me on a quint is laying, depending on the distance of those hydrants for me, with the limited amount of hose, can cause a problem and something I have to consider if I want to secure my own water supply to make sure I can get to the building if it's a distance from a hydrant. But the other thing is St. Louis County currently is adopting some countywide SOGs, and they also are requiring the second due company to establish that water supply. But again, it's there's latitude given to the first arriving company officer. If they need water or it's beyond what the booster tank can handle, they certainly have the ability to lay in or forward lay to another plug to establish their own.
Let me pose this question to you, Jason. You ever perform a split lay, where you may not have enough hose to lay in from a hydrant, so you lay in from the entrance to, say, an apartment complex, and have another company either forward in or reverse out after connecting up to your supply line?
I've not done that where I work currently. We've not done that, but out here in the rural area, we've done split lays frequently. That's something pretty common actually out here that, quite honestly, if I talked about it up in the county, I'm not sure a lot of them would know what I'm talking about. But yeah, we do the split lays a lot out here in the rural area.
So way to go with tankers. You don't want your tankers having to negotiate a narrow driveway. Keep your folded tanks, keep your tankers out on the main drag, and lay in your own supply line. All right, from the D.C. area, in the Northeast, Dan Shaw, Battalion Chief with Fairfax County. Could you weigh in on this, sir?
Sure. I mean, again, I'm spoiled by a municipal environment in which I work. We have a plug on every corner, mostly every place we go. And additionally, we get units there very quickly. But, I would say is we have this conversation, and we have this often with our manuals, is it comes down to the belief of what engines do. And engines bring water. And we want engines to bring water every single time. We're fortunate we get the trucks to show up, we get rescues to show up, but engines need to bring water every single time. So we're trying to condition the right behavior. So for us, even when we have a 2-on-1 response, the expectation is if a second engine gets put on a call with you, you are putting hose in the street, doing a forward lay from a municipal water supply because you're establishing a water supply. Now specifically for us in our operational manuals for all the occupancy types, the first engine's job is to identify that water supply plan, because if it's rural, maybe they'll use a tanker. If it's the 90% other suburban fires, it's going to be a layout, a split lay. And then the second engine's job is to ensure the consistent water supply is completed. So the first engine will lay in, the second engine picks up their plug, the third lays out, usually the secondary water supply inside Charlie, and the fourth picks theirs up. And the reason we do that is exactly what you said, Bill. There's some variables in there that we can't you can't discount. That being, if you've ever been in the Washington D.C. region, we got plenty of traffic. So what could be a 2-minute response could easily be much greater. You get a 50-foot ladder truck that positions in the front. There goes that fantastic position. And then our brothers in blue invariably seem to be attracted to hydrants like moths to a light, and will block that plug that was beautiful that you wanted to lay out from, and jeopardizes the whole plan. So, like I said, we're really trying to, and then you incorporate also when you talk about come off tank water is, with our fire behavior nowadays, what you just saw, I know we were talking about before we got on this conversation, we had a fire very similar that was very small in a garden apartment when the guys pulled up. By the time they made the stretch up the 3rd floor, it had already taken hold of the entire deck, the attic space. Unfortunately, a company outside knocked it down while the guys were just getting ready to hit it from the inside, and it worked out fantastic. But if we had taken the established water supply of that whole equation, we could have lost a lot more. So for us, the big thing is conditioning behaviors. That you're an engine company, your job is to bring water every single time. And if you work in a municipal water supply that we have, we're a hydrant every corner, absolutely. You're dropping a line, you're running up there, and the second line's establishing that water supply and securing it, and make sure we have a consistent water supply for the entire operation.
If I could just expand on something, fellas, this is why my department is a forward laying department, but one of the drawbacks of the forward lay, is that we have had an occasion with heavy smoke showing in, say, an apartment complex, forward laid a line in, and we're in the wrong spot. You got to know where you're going. The beauty of the reverse lay is if you find your source of water, a lot of times we'll back down, and we know we have the closest hydrant, and then we could drop our hose and we can reverse out. Something we rarely do, but it's one of the advantages of a reverse lay. And the other problem with the forward lay is if you don't know definitely where your hydrants are, you may lay 1,000 feet of 5-inch hose out on the street and pass up 2 other hydrants on the way in if you do not have a hydrant map or you're not familiar with the area.
Well, it's like you said at the beginning, Bill, is that there is no silver bullet. I mean, we manage a dynamic process called a fire, and that's what our theme is always to make sure that we're conditioned in response. That you're an engine company, you must bring water Then you take your experience and your sound judgment and match it to the fire you run and say, all right, this is not going to be a forward lay. I got to do a split, or I got to yard this engine, or whatever the case may be. But your job is to make sure you have a consistent water supply for that fire. Whatever means that your experience, your judgment, and the situation dictates to you. Exactly right. If you have a silver bullet, say every time we must do a forward lay, it's short-sighted.
Dan, you brought up a great point with the apartment building. For me, if I get an apartment, I've got to hit a water supply on the way in, simply because if I pull a static line or a dead load that's not pre-connected, and I pull the entire thing, I'm cutting my water in half just from the amount of water that fills the hose. And so I've got to make sure I've got a water supply, otherwise I can't even start to begin to make an attack because of the limited water I carry on my truck.
You know, it seems like most of us are in departments that do a forward lay, and we're fortunate to have staffing of 4 for most of the people here, but we know that is not the case in most of the country. A forward lay in most of the areas that are running, maybe 3 people, and we know some engines are less than 3, is leaving the firefighter at the hydrant and the officer arriving with just their engineer. So you don't really have the proper staffing to get a line in place unless it's just the first floor of a 1-story or something. But another lay we haven't really talked much about, which I think is fantastic, especially if you have a dead load, is the backstretch, which we see departments like Detroit or Chicago, FDNY, performing commonly, and especially for departments that have lower staffing. You can leave, let's take the 3-person engine company. They can drop the hose. They're not making a choice to do a forward or a reverse lay. They can go right to the building, find the location of the fire, grab their attack line, having the officer and firefighter there, and then laying out to the hydrant. So you're able to do both tasks at the same time. And secure a water supply. It ends up being a good water supply because even if your hydrant is low pressure, you can always pump back. You wouldn't require a 4-way valve or something like we're dealing with. And it's a fantastic stretch. The other advantage is you can leave the front of the building for those aerial ladders, because we all know you can stretch hose, you can't stretch ladders. So if your engine has the ability to do that and you are willing to give it a try, give it a try. It may really work out and be a good option for you.
I just want to clarify that a backstretch would be a reverse lay from fire to hydrant, correct, Daryl? And you know what really...
Yeah, and I think the terminology could get a little confusing. When I'm saying backstretch, I'm talking about taking a static loaded attack line with those folds of hose that you remove, and the engine is essentially laying the attack line to the hydrant. So your hydrant spacing in your area has to be able to accommodate it. We're not talking about a rural area where you're laying 800 feet down the street.
You know what really facilitates that is the pre-connected front suction on an engine.
Absolutely.
Because it's even a subpar engineer can spot at a hydrant and connect without a big kink in the line. It seems like that's a real problem with making a side connection to the steamer connection of a hydrant. It's not that they're too far away, they're too close, and then you end up with a big kink.
Yeah, and just to clarify also in what the reverse lay would be is, let's say the company came into the block and the next engine's right behind them, and they were able to perform the reverse lay, being laying a supply line from the first due engine to the hydrant. That in my area, San Francisco does that on nearly every fire. They go right to the fire, and the second engine secures that water supply by laying out from the first engine to the hydrant. Sacramento in our area is also performing that kind of lay.
And one of the variations I've seen on the forward leg, Daryl, that you were discussing earlier, is that with a short-staffed crew, they're carrying loop loads. So they've got basically a strap on the large diameter hose, and they just basically loop the hydrant with the strap. They forward lay. They don't leave anybody behind, and then the second due, whether it's an ambulance, a bus, or a squad or whatever, they hook up the hydrant and they do the hydrant hookup rather than having the first dude do the hookup. Just kind of a variation on the theme.
Yeah, my last department, that is the way we operated. We had to be certain that the next company was coming in the same direction, and so definitely required communication that way, and that could work out very well. Yeah, absolutely.
Bill, we're actually blowing up, according to our friends at Google, we're blowing up all over Twitter with questions here. So, and they're really tracking very closely to the next two questions we had planned. Again, you can hit us at #FETalk, and I hope you're going to stick with us. And we got a great webcast coming up right after this presentation. We've got Jerry Knapp doing House Fires, Modern Strategies and Tactics for Aggressive Operations with Jerry Knapp, 37-year veteran, great writer, great firefighter, right after this conversation. So I hope you can stay with us for another hour of fantastic information, webcast off fireengineering.com. But Google is blowing up. So, Bill, you want me to go to the next questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically I'm going to jump to question 4. Bill, we'll come back to number 3 just because we've got several questions related to it off the Twitter feed. And the question we have is, does your department require a second hose line be deployed at a working fire to be pumped from a different apparatus than the first one pumping the line, and does it have to be connected to a different source of water? Many of our Twitter questions, Bill, just so you know, came in saying, do you require multiple sources? Do you require 2 hydrants on commercials? And any exceptions to those rules? So if you want to take that and bring it around the panel.
Well, you all know that I learned to be a firefighter from my dad, a lieutenant, 33 years in the Chicago Fire Department. And in his day, they didn't have tanks, so they were a reverse-laying fire department. And when before they had large diameter hose in Chicago, I used to explain the way that we operate in Miami-Dade County, which is forward laying in a 5-inch supply line and operating. And he wasn't comfortable with that because although the hose is capable of providing all the water we're going to need at that fire, in fact, supplying 2 engines if necessary, all of our eggs are in one basket. There is no redundant water supply. And he used to pose this question to me, Bill, what good is your backup hose line if your first engine breaks down mechanically? What good is a second backup hose line if it's coming off the first engine or if something happens to their supply line? So in an ideal world, the second line at any fire should come from a second engine connected to a second source of water, although my department, and I'm sure most of us, violate that rule all the time just because of a matter of practicality. You want to weigh in on that, Daryl?
Yeah, you know, it certainly seems like an ideology. You know, we're not in the world where we're in like construction or something where we can set up all these systems prior to operating. We definitely are taking some risks, although I don't think huge risks. I don't have much experience in my 22 years of hose lines just completely failing. I certainly have a lot of experience with hose lines not being properly staffed and or properly stretched and flaked out. We do not require a second line be deployed at a fire or multiple sources of water. It's certainly done where we often secure a second water supply or stretch another line. A second line being more common than securing a second water supply. And I do get concerned that some people can focus in, especially if they don't have the staffing that I have the luxury to have, planning for all the contingencies rather than just properly staffing that first line. The best thing we can do for most fires is to put the fire out and get a line in place flowing a proper amount of water and properly staffed. And I think when you do that, you negate a lot of the need for the redundancies. If you have the luxury to have the staffing and the people to properly staff that line, secure a water supply, and then add all these other contingency plans and safety measures in place, then so be it. But I wouldn't want to see that taking the priority.
Cardinal rule: stretch the first line first. 90% of the time, or over 90%, you're going to put the fire out. Stretch the first line first, and if it takes the combined crews of 2 or 3 engine companies to get that first line into position and operating, and that's what it's going to take. Get the first line first, then we'll concern ourselves with additional hose lines. Clark, you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, sir, Cap. It does make perfect sense, in theory, to have separate pumpers, separate water supplies if you are using a backup line. Unfortunately, in my department, for residential firefighting, we do not do that. We use one pumper in position, and he will be pumping the primary and the backup line. Now, commercial firefighting, again, something completely different. We try not to fight the fire we have now. We fight the fire we might have in 10 minutes. So typically, commercial firefighting, we are planning for master streams. We are planning for pumping aerials. So that being said, we are looking for as many hydrants as we can to position these apparatus to flow large caliber streams for an extended period of time. So again, residential versus commercial firefighting, 2 completely different animals.
I like what you said about your planning for the fire that you're going to have in 10 minutes. And if you want to call that a transitional attack, you can call it that. But what you're thinking about is you have a plan B in place, already ready to go. If your guys are chased out by deteriorating conditions, you can smoothly transition into a defensive attack. You already have your heavy artillery set up, ready to operate. Excellent point.
You know, I've got a quick follow-up. You know, Wayne Gretzky once said, "A good hockey player plays where the puck is. A great hockey player plays where the puck will be."
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Jason, I'm going to be interested to hear, because you have an entirely different perspective. Would you please weigh in on this issue?
Yeah, I think ideally we kind of fall into the same category as far as what lines we pull, and quite honestly, we typically don't pull off of a separate truck. But I think there's also got to be a difference from the incident commander and the officers on the scene as to what that line is going to be used for. I think as a company officer, I have pulled the line off of a secondary truck to protect an interior exposure while a search and attack's going on, like an interior stairwell. But typically, we pull the first 2 lines off the same truck. And during some training evolutions, we've actually found that it's quicker, and if we're really worried about water supply, even on residential, we'll put a pumper on a plug, which kind of gives you some redundancy. If the first, everything we've talked about is not so much the line failing as the pump. If you lose your engine, you can still pump through that first truck. But typically, we're kind of with the rest of them. We don't normally pull a second line. Now, if you get into a large fire, exposure protection, multiple hands working, anything after 2 comes off of a separate truck, and ideally a separate water supply, but it really depends on, and I'm sure we've all got the same issues with access, where the second water supply is.
Jason, that's huge. That's huge. As one of the huge advantages of having an engine directly on the hydrant pumping to another engine. If either engine breaks down, if the engine on the plug breaks down, at least you have hydrant pressure feeding the engine at the fireground. If the fireground engine breaks down, then it just becomes a big manifold, and the engine on the hydrant supplies the pressure necessary to pressurize the hose lines at the fire. Dan, would you like to weigh in on this, sir?
Yes. And you said it right off the bat when you said all the eggs in one basket. Now, obviously, I don't have nearly the amount of years of distinguished career that yourself and Chief Halton do. But I remember when I first got in the department and first started learning how to drive engine companies, I was taught that if your pump didn't go into gear, the driver taught you how to put it in neutral, and your quad underneath, you could put the long flathead screwdriver up in the shaft of the pin and pop it in the pump gear, and then if the throttle cable blew, you just go up and you hit the accelerator. I remember my last assignment of helping one of the guys taking the driver's test with our engine that was 5 years old. You couldn't do any of that unless you hooked up a computer to it and plugged it in, and then you dialed up. There was no manual of it. So when you say put all your eggs in one basket, I unequivocally agree with you, because there's so many variables that can go wrong with that engine. Like, last night I worked, it was 19 degrees. that cold weather can do something to one of these pumps. It freezes up. If we don't establish a water supply and have that secondary water supply established, we put all our eggs in one basket, and then what are we going to do? So for us, a lot of what we end up doing is our engines are married. First lays in, second ensures a water supply, third lays in a separate water supply, usually is responsible for side Charlie, fourth picks up their water. Now for the first and second line, the way we do that is our engines are set up that, if you go from the front of the engine to the rear of the engine, the pre-connected hose lines are 100, 200, 300, 400. And the idea being is that you walk up and you see the 200 missing. If you were devoid of common sense, you probably have to pull the 300, so you at least have 100 feet greater than that first line that was pulled. So we kind of tier it. I would say 90% of the time, 2 of our lines do come off one engine company that has an established water supply. The third line, the fourth line, they're going to come off a different engine, off a different water supply. And and I know it's a case of semantics, but one thing we've really changed is we don't use the term backup line. Backup line is a function that's performed by the second line, because we don't want people thinking that this line is solely used for the backup line and that's all it can do. So it's a second line, but its primary job is to make sure the first line's in service. Then you can go get a second line, and then that can perform a backup to the first line. And it just seems like a play on words, but it is vitally important because a lot of people will pull 2 lines that are both too short, and they're 2 useless lines. So with the first line in service, then if you think first, sequentially, go to the second line. Now where do I get my second line? And if that happened over the span of the incident, maybe you had that secondary water supply established, and much like we talked in the prior incident, maybe that third due engine got a better position, a better tactical position, for instance, like a basement fire. So we're hitting it from the exterior entrance side Charlie, and we're at the front door on side Alpha. Maybe that second line is going to come off that engine that's on side Charlie that has a secondary water supply, because our focus would get the first line service, and now because of the urban area I'm in, we have 4 engines, 2 trucks, and a rescue there in 8 minutes. We can have that next line pulled off a different water supply. Again, it's a dynamic process, but I agree with you. We try not to put all our eggs in one basket because there's way too many variables, especially with how high-tech our engines are now. If something goes wrong with that pump, you're not manually fixing it. You can crawl underneath there all day long, but you're done. You're out of the mix. And so having multiple water supplies, again, just goes back to conditioning that behavior that no matter how many hooks, halligans, and ladders we throw at a fire, it's not going to put it out. You got to get water on the fire, so we have to make sure we take care of that water supply plan.
I couldn't agree more. We had it posted. It was a YouTube video that was there was a series of them that were developed by the City of Miami Fire Department by a training captain, John Crawford, who since retired, that details what it takes to get a manually put an apparatus into pump when the automatic functions fail, when the electric or pneumatic functions fail, and it is an excellent resource for that information. Also, when was the last time as an engine company officer you took your guys out, or girls, and practiced the emergency pump shift procedure? And man, I got to tell you, I admittedly, it's not as often we should be doing it, but it is a drill that we all should be doing. And like you said, Dan, sometimes when you do that, because of the all the computer-based interlocks, sometimes you have to actually keep somebody in the cab to operate the throttle pedal in the cab in order for you to get any RPM. The other point I want to bring up, Dan, you brought up, is the length of hose line. Almost always, the second hose line is going to have to be at least as long or longer than the first line, because that's the line that goes to the rear, that's the line that goes to the floor above. Boss, we're ready for the next question if you want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to blend 2 of the questions together, Bill, just out of respect for where it came from. Several of, just so you know, the good folks at the Ferguson Fire Department, right by you, Jason, there, who are, God willing, are getting ready, but God willing won't have to do any heroic firefighting over the next few days. They are listening, and they had a question regarding the use of foam, and if our take on securing a water supply changes based upon their use of foam. They're a foam department. But I'd like to tie that, Bill, in with our other question that you and I discussed earlier, and we'll kind of bring it home with this. And again, to all our listeners, this is going to become a monthly presentation. You're going to have Fireground Operations once a month, a Google Hangout with Bill Gustin and Mike Dugan, bringing in various guests, talking about all this kind of conversation. So look forward to that starting in the month of January. And our good friend Key Hose, we can't thank him enough for being a sponsor of all this. Go to keyfirehose.com. But our good friends in Ferguson want to know, to all the panelists, if anything changes with the use of foam. And the other question that Bill and I discussed earlier is, does your department place any restriction on the use of what are called booster lines, or real line, or the red line? And what are those restrictions, and how do they apply? Bill?
Bobby, you blended two questions beautifully, because there is a philosophy, and I believe it's flawed, fundamentally flawed, that if you have a CAFS, compressed air foam system, or some other type of Class A foam system, that it gives you a license or gives you permission to flow less water. And that is so false. That's so false. You have to still have the ability for an interior structure fire to flow at least 150 gallons a minute. Compressed air foam systems in general, although they've increased in reliability over the years, cannot be entirely dependent on them. I don't think that your source of hose line, your source of water supply should vary any just because you have some type of Class A foam system that in theory would allow you to apply less water to a fire than if you didn't. You should be using the same size hose lines, the same potential flow, and the same water supplies. Now, Daryl, do you have any experience with the Class A foam or CAFs?
No, I don't have any experience using CAFs. No department I've worked for uses them. I don't think anyone in my area uses them. But the UL has shown that using that type of system, that using less water isn't knocking down. By using this foam, you're not going to knock down fire any quicker. The only thing it's actually doing is suppressing the ability of that fire to build up again. It's not actually doesn't have greater cooling of the burning solid fuels. So you're absolutely right. You still need to focus on flowing a proper amount of water. Now, as far as using booster lines, the Oakland Fire Department, prior to me working there, did have members that used red lines, we called a red line, in buildings, and they put a stop to it, so much so that we had a generation of rigs where they did not put red lines on the rig to keep people from doing that. But since then, we have a policy, GPM, in a residential structure fire. We don't have a minimum for commercial fires, but it is recommended to have a minimum of at least 250 GPM for a commercial fire. But you know, we had a tragedy on the East Coast. You know, it was the furniture fire that killed a number of firefighters, and one of the contributing factors was you know, those initial lines. So I think these are good recommendations to not use red lines inside of buildings. We should. That's not aggressive firefighting. Aggressive firefighting is to bring the proper weapon and plan for the worst case scenario.
Clark, you want to weigh in on that, sir?
Yes, sir, Cap. As far as the foam goes, we use our whole fleet is Pierce Quantum. We do not have any CAF systems in our fleet whatsoever. We did have some several years ago when we got some grant money. We bought these big fancy engines with everything on them, and we just didn't use the CAF system enough. So what my department chose to do is we use the Husky 12. We have an automatic proportioner wet foam system in the engines. It's just a push button setup on the pump panel. It is beautiful. We use it on every fire for overhaul. We use it for car fires. It is as simple as the engineer pushing one button and dialing how much percentage he wants. So we use a lot of wet foam that has no bearing on how much water we bring to the fire, though. We always bring the full amount of water we can, and but we're real fortunate with these wet foam systems. We have the Husky system. And as far as the booster line goes, we have what we call a jump line on our rigs, but it is plumbed the same way as all the cross lays. It is a 1 3/4 outlet, but it is rubber hose. We use the jump lines strictly for exterior firefighting, dumpsters, car fires, things like that. Rubber hose does not go interior ever, as far as we're concerned. And we do have a booster line, which it's a smaller line, about a 1-inch line. We don't use it very much. We love the front. Our jump line is in the front bumper, so that deploys easily. We pull up right to the car fire, right up to the dumpster fire. It's typically 100 feet. We get that on the ground. I want 50 feet of working line in the engine, 50 feet back. It's easy to deploy. It's easy to clean up when we're done. But yeah, we don't take rubber line. When you guys are saying red line, do you mean the rubber line? I'm not familiar with red line.
The hose.
1-inch reel line.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, we have. Yeah, we just have a booster line that we pretty much water flowers with. We don't use 1-inch for anything on the department. And one more thing I want to say to the brothers and sisters in Ferguson, we are watching your situation very carefully, and we are pre-planning ourselves, and we are playing the what-if game, and what if we were in Ferguson, and what if stuff happened. So, we are definitely thinking about you brothers and sisters right now, all right? Take care of yourselves.
I'm a big advocate of the Class A foam, especially car fires and overhaul. I like to think of it as the gift that keeps on giving, because once you put the water on the fuel, I think Daryl mentioned it, it stays on the fuel. It is attracted to fuel. The Class A foam is attracted to, I think it has something to do with its polarization, but it is attracted to carbon, so it is attracted to fuel, and it stays on the fuel, and continues to penetrate and pre-wet unburned fuel rather than just run right out of the building as runoff. So big fan of Class A foam. Again, bottom line is it does not justify, in my view, a smaller hose line or a lesser water supply.
Yeah, the thing to think about that with the CAF systems, and I've had chiefs and company officers that have bought CAFs actually make the comment that they don't need supply lines now. And the thing to remember is, you get on a fire, and you talked about it earlier, is where's that fire going, and all you do is worry about pulling a CAF and not a supply line, and now it gets into an exposure, or it gets beyond your capabilities, and now you're scrambling and you're behind the 8 ball like we're trying to avoid to begin with. And we just don't use booster lines for interior fire attack.
Dan, you want to weigh in on that, sir?
Hey, remember, it still needs 99% water. We use that 1% foam in our CAF stuff, and we have it in our rural area for the couple engines out there, and it's great stuff. It does really have an application, but I'm speaking to the choir with this group. It's like Andy Frederick always said when he held up this smoothbore, looked through it, and said, "This is the only thing water sees when it goes to the fire." There's a beauty to that. It's a very simplistic system, and when we put these other components into the pump, you still can have a failure of that. Then what are you going to do? Well, at a minimum, at least if you have an established water supply, you can still fight fire with just water and move forth with air. As for the booster lines, they were great for putting out smoldering mulch. We don't even buy them anymore. We don't even put them on our engines. They serve no purpose for us. Everything we use is 1 3/4 hose lines.
I don't have experience, like I said, with the CAF system, but in California, we're known for having these large wildland fires, and they have shown to be a benefit in structure protection, where companies are letting down a structure with a fire front coming towards that, to where it can prevent that structure from catching fire. They are very expensive systems. They they do require a lot of maintenance. I imagine that some of the Southern California fire departments may use them. If anybody down there is using them and have success, please write in and let us know if you're having success with that. But in the wildland urban interface, the Class A foam can be a benefit for structure protection.
Yeah, and we see mostly, I mean, like you said, it's cost prohibitive to have a whole system, 40 engines. It's hard to have every engine be cabs because it's so expensive. So we have in our outlying areas that are going to be waiting a little bit longer for water. And usually when we have like a deep-seated fire, just something that's being stubborn won't go out, we often request, a caps engine. A lot of times when we do acquired structure burns, we'll bring one of our caps engines up when we're done, exactly for that reason. It's fantastic firefighting quality, but I think every fire chief has to weigh that cost between the cap system and the productivity of a well-placed, hose line that's discharging water. Which one is better? Which one's going to be more supported and have some longevity?
Now, these cap systems we're talking about, do they run on their own? Do they require their own air compressor, or do they run off the apparatus's air compressor? Because if they require their own, that adds an enormous amount of weight as well to the apparatus, doesn't it?
My understanding, you have to have a compressor, and I have no first-hand knowledge of the caps, but other than I've read that it looks and handles like shaving cream, but which I don't see how that can penetrate a thermal barrier. I don't know, but obviously it does. But yes, it has to have, is my understanding. Maybe somebody else here, Jason, would you know more about that, sir?
I really don't. I just know I've talked to some people that have them and say they can be a lot of maintenance. I don't know if they require their own compressor. My initial thought is that they do, but I'm not real sure. We don't have them.
There are a myriad of systems out there. They do require a compressor. I've had the opportunity to work with them both here in the United States and in Europe, where I worked with a system called System 7. It's a little bit different. They're interesting, and they've become much more user-friendly than they were in the past. The technology has certainly evolved to where basically now it's just like your regular phone system. It's a push-button system. So depending on when you're looking at the technology, the older technology did have some hiccups in the giddy up, and it was a 2 or 3 step process to get it into play. Now it's basically a single step. I know that we are looking at it with NIST and UL for some evaluation down the road. Right now we're still trying to figure out over at UL and NIST how water works. So that's going to be the next thing we're actually looking at. Hey, Bill, I'm going to give you a second to say goodbye to our panel, and we're going to move on. We've got a webcast with Jerry Knapp coming up on modern house fires, strategy for aggressive tactics and aggressive operations. That'll be coming up on fireengineering.com in just 2 or 3 minutes. So, Bill, I'm going to let you thank the panel and bring it home, and I'm going to step aside and get ready to do the webcast with Jerry Knapp on fireengineering.com. House fires, thank you to our sponsor, Key Fire Hose. What a great company, Dothan, Alabama, American-made hose, the fire hose company. Please go to their website, keyfire.com. And then this will be the regularly scheduled hangout once a month. Join Bill Gustin, Mike Dugan on fireground operations right here at fireengineering.com. Bill, if you thank the panel, I'm going to step aside.
Fellas, thanks again so much for your participation. I just think it's great that we got people from different sections of the country with diverse backgrounds, diverse departments. We've only scratched the surface here. We can go on forever if Bobby allows us to. As I said, this is going to be a monthly installment. I want to thank my brothers very much from east to west, and God bless you and may He keep you safe. Thank you. Thank you, Key Fire Hose. Thank Bobby, and we thank Fire Engineering.
It's always a pleasure.
Thank you,
Cap. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Nice
Thanks,
talking to all.
everybody. Everybody have a good Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
All right.
Same here.
To go over, Jerry, we're going to